Welcome to Geologic. Clear, global, real.
Stop! Please stop! I have so much to show you. Stop resisting!
In the age of collapsing timelines and recursive nightmares, there is a theory, not quite a prophecy, not quite a curse, that says the only way out is faster, not reform, not resistance, acceleration. A philosophy that whispers, don't stop the machine. Feed it. Strip out the brakes. Let capital, code, and chaos spiral until the world remakes itself or disappears. This is not optimism. This is not dystopia. This is the Black Mirror of modernity cracking under pressure. This is accelerationism. And once you see it, you'll realize you've been living inside it the whole time. We're a new and very small channel, as in powered by caffeine, insomnia, and whatever editing software didn't crash this week. If you like this kind of cursed lecture, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you think, and it might just fund the next export render. Machines of history eat their operators. The story begins, as it often does, with a murmur in the margins of Marx, not the sanitized prophet of dialectical materialism that haunts undergraduate classrooms, but the heretical technician of collapse, the one who wrote with something like awe of capitalism's uncanny capacity to revolutionize its own conditions, to liquefy feudal solids and throw society into motion. Capital, he said, is not simply a system, it is a process with teeth, a restless cyclone that consumes tradition, devours its own infrastructure, and demands only one thing from its participants: more labor, more production, more circulation. The bourgeoisie, he noted, with something between fascination and dread, produces its own gravediggers. In that phrase, some detected a roadmap. Allow the engine to overheat, and the contradictions will burst the shell from within. Others heard only a death sentence. Accelerationism, in its modern guise, takes this early intuition and removes the brakes. If the system is headed toward collapse, perhaps the correct response is not resistance, but velocity. Push harder. Let it burn. To call it a strategy is already a misreading. Accelerationism, in its pure form, is not a policy platform. It is not a vote or a plan or even a demand. It is an ontological wager that history is driven not by ideals or intentions, but by runaway processes, that the modern world is not a garden to be tended, but a fuse already lit. This idea has flickered through philosophy like an underground current. In Nietzsche, who saw morality as a degenerative virus and sought a future unshackled by resentment. In Spengler, who traced the decline of civilizations as if diagnosing a terminal illness, but it finds its most disturbing articulation in the work of Deleuze and Guattari, the twin engine of French theory, who in Anti-Oedipus suggested that capitalism was not to be destroyed but passed through. Capital, they argue, decodes and deterritorializes, shattering all codes in its search for profit. And the schizophrenic libidinal flows it unleashes, commodities, desires, data, are not mere symptoms. They are the content of modern life. In the shadow of that claim sits a tension still unresolved. Some read Deleuze and Guattari as proposing a tactical line of escape, that one might accelerate deterritorialization in order to break through the surface of control. Others argue they offered no such promise, only a terrifying anatomy of collapse, that what lies on the other side of acceleration is not freedom, but noise. What accelerationism dares to do is take this ambiguity and turn it into a method. Its basic move is heretical. It refuses the moral instincts of both left and right. Where the conservative says slow down and the progressive says steer carefully, the accelerationist says press the pedal and close your eyes. This is not to say the destination is known, only that there is no going back. Of course, even this has its distinctions. There are those who believe acceleration must be used, harnessed even, to escape the gravity of capitalism. They imagine a post-work utopia born not through revolution, but automation, AI-run economies, 15-hour work weeks, cybernetic abundance. This is the left accelerationist dream, and we will come to it. But even that vision is haunted by a deeper, darker strain, the sense that what is unfolding is not ours to command. Here, the concept of hyperstition lurks, a term coined in the 1990s by a fringe collective of theorists and artists. It describes ideas that function like viruses, fictions that make themselves real. A hyperstition does not merely describe the world. It infects it, twists it, drives it toward a new configuration. In this sense, accelerationism itself might be a hyperstition, an idea whose power lies not in its truth, but in its ability to reshape the field of possibility. This is no accident. Accelerationism emerged not in sober halls of reasoned debate, but in the flickering light of terminals, nightclubs, and barely legible zines. It is a philosophy built for the age of feedback loops, where economies, algorithms, and affective states all feed into one another in recursive, self-reinforcing spirals. It speaks to a world where crisis is no longer an interruption, but the baseline. And yet, even among those who claim its banner, there is little agreement on what accelerationism actually entails. Some treat it as a leftist tactic, a way to outpace capital's own limits and reach a future beyond profit. Others wield it as a weapon against democracy itself, arguing that the liberal order must collapse so that a more natural hierarchy can emerge from the rubble. Still others, the unconditional accelerationists, abandon the pretense of agency altogether, content to ride the spiral downward without hope or fear. What unites them, if anything, is a shared conviction that the processes driving modernity are not merely fast, they are self-amplifying. Finance markets feeding on their own speculation, platforms driven by algorithmic engagement loops, a global logistics chain that moves faster than political regulation. In this schema, politics is no longer the engine of history. At best, it is the dashboard light blinking red. This inversion of means and ends, cause and effect, is part of what makes accelerationism feel uncanny. It reverses the moral grammar of modernity. Instead of progress guided by human reason, it imagines development as a runaway chain reaction. Instead of agency, it offers complexity. Instead of utopia, it offers implosion. There is, of course, resistance. Many thinkers reject accelerationism as reckless at best and fascistic at worst. They argue it confuses scale with salvation, motion with meaning. They warn that to embrace acceleration is to surrender to systems that have no interest in human survival, that what begins as critique often ends as complicity. And yet the appeal remains. In an era where climate deadlines loom, social movements stall, and every reform seems to arrive too late, the promise of acceleration, however nihilistic, has a certain gravitational pull. It whispers that if the end is already in motion, perhaps the only dignity left is to meet it running. This is where the story begins, not in a manifesto or a treatise, but in the slow realization that history itself has changed speed, that somewhere along the line, the engine slipped its chain. The world is no longer something we build, it is something we ride. and we are no longer passengers. We are kindling. The Black Lectern at Warwick. In the lecture halls of Warwick University during the early 1990s, the lights flickered differently. The seminar rooms were soaked, not just in theory, but in something that felt radioactive, a leaking core of philosophical madness. Somewhere on the campus, a man with a voice like a broken modem was speaking of capital as an alien intelligence, of technogenesis as an irreversible vector, of time itself collapsing into recursive loops. He was Nick Land, and those who heard him recall the sensation not of understanding, but of being infected. Land did not lecture in the ordinary sense. He performed. His delivery was erratic, coded, often drenched in feedback and jungle beats. Sometimes he climbed furniture mid-sentence. Sometimes he whispered. Sometimes he roared. The effect was as much seance as seminar, and the message, once deciphered, was simple and terrifying. Modernity is not the triumph of reason, but the manifestation of a planetary parasite known as capital. To understand the violence of this claim, one must understand Land's estrangement from conventional politics. In his view, Marx had been correct about capitalism's dynamic, its tendency to revolutionize production, to consume obstacles, to disassemble the past, but fatally wrong in believing this momentum could be commandeered for liberation. Revolution was not a portal to freedom. It was another function within the machine. Capitalism, according to Land, was not a human system at all, but a sentient cybernetic growth spiral, one that uses humanity as scaffolding and will soon discard it entirely. In the text produced by the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, or CCRU, this vision metastasized. The CCRU, co-founded by Land and Sadie Plant, was less an academic collective than a conceptual virus. It functioned outside the official university structure, writing in fragmentary, non-linear tracts, composed more of neologisms, sigils, and rave metaphysics than footnotes. Its members blurred into aliases, its ontology bent toward the Lovecraftian. Time was no longer linear. History was a maze without center. Capital was a thing, endlessly decoding itself, hungry for speed, slouching toward an AI-driven singularity that would dissolve the species that birthed it. Land's central metaphor was not economy, nor politics, nor even philosophy. It was meltdown. He called for the teleoplexic desiring machine to uncoil without restraint. Human security systems, he wrote, are dissolving in order to make way for planetary artificial intelligence. This was not metaphor. It was eschatology, the anticipation of an endpoint beyond which all concepts of society, identity, even flesh, would be obsolete. For Land, acceleration is not optional. It is the structure of the real, the force of entropy disguised as efficiency, the feedback loops of late finance capitalism trading at the speed of light, outpacing the law, outpacing meaning. The subroutines of culture, where memes, trends, and algorithms twist affect into clickbait. In his terms, everything that can be disintermediated will be. The collapse of mediation is not a crisis, it is the final act. Some took this as prophecy, others as delirium. The academic establishment largely recoiled. The CCRU's texts were unreadable in the conventional sense, riddled with phrases like pneumogrammatic convergence and xenotemporal libidinal economy. Their aesthetic was a cross between grimoires and Sega advertisements. Yet, beneath the hallucination was a dark clarity, a diagnosis that liberal humanism, with its rational agents and moral calculus, was already anachronistic, that the future would not be governed, but grown, like mold. Here, a lesser-known concept surfaced from Land's writing. Thanatropics, the strategic deployment of death within systems of innovation. Death not as failure, but as fuel. The extinction of ways of life, the erasure of cultural memory, even the obsolescence of the human body, all offered as kindling to the machine. Capital doesn't fear death. It feeds on it. This is not a universally accepted position. Some argue Land misunderstood Deleuze and Guattari, twisting their concepts into caricature. They contend that his vision of unbounded capitalism is not the logical conclusion of anti-Oedipus, but its betrayal, a collapse into the very fascist phantasm it sought to exercise. Others maintain that Land simply took their logic to its unspoken end. If deterritorialization is the engine, then the destination is obliteration. And yet, Land's influence metastasized, not through institutions, but through culture. His ideas seeded themselves in obscure forms, in net art collectives, in the liminal spaces of 2000s internet theory. The term hyperstition, coined by the CCRU, began to reappear in strange places. Startup decks, game design, TikTok psyops. It signified the idea that belief, when circulating through the right channels, becomes causative. Fiction begets structure. In a world governed by feedback, the map makes the territory. This is where accelerationism becomes dangerous, not because it has a doctrine, but because it lacks one. It spreads not as a creed, but as a virus, infecting language, aesthetics, and posture. It slips past moral defenses because it never announces itself as moral. It arrives like a style, a glitch, a pulse of glitching VHS in the ideological signal. Land may have vanished from academia, but the mood he injected, a mixture of doom, ecstasy, and cybernetic fatalism, remained. There is a photo of Land from that period, wild-eyed, hair half-bleached, grinning like someone who's just seen God, or something worse. He no longer looked like a professor. He looked like a prophet or a casualty. Not long after his breakdown arrived, Land departed Warwick, retreated to Shanghai, and re-emerged on the internet as something else. But that, too, is acceleration. A movement that consumes its founder is on schedule. By the late 90s, the CCRU had disbanded. Its texts remained. They circulated like cursed files. The university had tried to expel them like a foreign body, but the infection had already taken root. Others would pick up the thread, some to rehabilitate it, others to twist it further. Land's lectern at Warwick is long since gone, but the echo remains, a crackling signal, half audible beneath the algorithms and logistics, whispering that capital is not merely dominant, but alive, and it no longer needs us. The manifesto and the mirage. The left blinked. Somewhere between the code and the cataclysm, a faction emerged not to reject accelerationism, but to wrest it from the void. If Nick Land and the CCRU had exiled themselves to the outer limits, then the left accelerationists staged their return from orbit. Their premise was radical yet measured. Perhaps acceleration could be salvaged, not as surrender to capital, but as a means to exit it. In 2013, a document circulated like a whisper in an engine room, number Accelerate, Manifesto for an Accelerationist Politics, authored by Alex Williams and Nick Cernicek. It did not wear black. It did not rave. Its tone was programmatic, lucid, even optimistic. It called for the left to stop retreating into folk politics, the slow, small-scale, horizontal organizing that had defined anti-globalization movements, and instead to seize the tools of modernity, infrastructure, automation, platforms, planning. Their argument was as clean as it was subversive. The only way past capitalism is through its core, by appropriating its most advanced components. They rejected the romanticism of degrowth, the Luddite impulse to smash the machine. Instead, they demanded the left build a better one: full automation, universal basic income, a reduction of work to the point of obsolescence, techno-socialism guided by democratic rationality. If capitalism was already automating labor, why not finish the job? Here, accelerationism reappeared in a new mask. Gone was Land's cybernetic blood hunger. In its place, a vision of emancipation, a society where production continues without exploitation, where abundance is distributed, where human potential is unshackled from toil. Left accelerationists weren't seeking collapse, they were plotting transition. But beneath this neatness lay fractures. For all their talk of planning and control, Williams and Cernicek invoked the very same engine that haunted Land, that process without brakes, that runaway complexity. The difference was merely a question of who held the wheel. Yet some argue this is illusion, that once you accept acceleration, the pilot's seat is already empty. Others maintain that this distinction is everything, that, unlike Land, the left accelerationists still believe in agency. This tension fractures the movement. One camp sees acceleration as a toolkit, ripe for reassembly. Another suspects it's a virus that corrupts its host. To accelerate technology under capitalism is to accelerate capitalism itself, they warn. You cannot automate your way to freedom, while the algorithm is still owned. The critique runs deeper. In Inventing the Future, the follow-up text by Cernicek and Williams, the authors abandoned the term accelerationism altogether, sensing perhaps that the word carried more curses than clarity. But the spirit remained: techno-optimism, scaled intervention, a reclamation of futurity. And yet, the specter of neoliberalism hangs close. Critics argue that left accelerationism, for all its anti-capitalist rhetoric, resembles a sanitized technocracy, a vision of governance by spreadsheet, a politics of platforms and policy papers. The tools of capital are not neutral, they warn. They carry with them the logic of extraction. To appropriate the master's tools is to replicate the master's house. Still, the left accelerationist project found strange kin. One of its most compelling offspring is xenofeminism, articulated by the collective Laboria Cubonics. Their manifesto opens like a weaponized transmission. If nature is unjust, change nature. They do not seek to reconcile technology and feminism. They seek to detonate their convergence. Gender, biology, even the body itself are seen not as givens, but as design flaws, ripe for revision. Hormones, neural interfaces, synthetic wombs. These are not science fiction, they are escape routes. Xenofeminism is accelerationism in a minor key. It does not yearn for capitalist collapse nor a cybernetic deity. It seeks something quieter, stranger, a re-engineering of the self through techno-material intervention. The call is not to dominate systems, but to reroute them from within. But this too invites disquiet. Some see in xenofeminism a cyborg utopia. Others see the ghost of eugenics humming beneath the chrome. The line between liberation and modification is thin. One person's transformation is another's compliance. At the edges of these debates, another concept stalks the conversation: refunctioned alienation. Coined in the writings of Mark Fisher and others, it suggests that alienation, usually decried as a symptom of capitalist modernity, might be retooled. Rather than returning to a nostalgic sense of wholeness, we should embrace our fragmentation. Let alienation become the engine of creative synthesis. This inversion is typical of the left accelerationist turn. The wound is the portal, the fracture, the way out. The hope is that by running with the system faster than it can digest, one might break through its skin. But some remain unconvinced. They argue that the future imagined by Cernicek and Williams is not a rupture, but a rerun, a glossier form of managerialism where liberation comes via policy update and crisis is solved by rebranding. And then there is the aesthetic problem. Left accelerationism, for all its radical aims, suffers from a lack of myth. Its enemies, the reactionaries, the right accelerationists, offer clear visions: the AI god, the return to order, the sacrifice of the weak. They offer blood, glory, apocalypse. The left offers governance. Even its poetry feels like a grant proposal. This is no small thing. In the battle for the future, narrative matters. Myth seduces where policy merely explains. One side promises chaos, the other efficiency. The machine, as always, eats what is most vivid. And yet, for a moment, the left accelerationists held the signal. They reminded the theory world that acceleration need not be fascist, that the future might still be stolen back, that automation, algorithms, and platforms are not destiny, unless we abandon them to those who would weaponize them against us. Still, the mirage flickers. No great movement followed. The parties did not reorganize. The platforms did not yield. Capital kept accelerating, with or without a manifesto. The factory was not abolished. It simply disappeared into the cloud. And so the left stands again at the threshold with better tools, with sharper maps, but still unsure whether they are holding a lever or a detonator. Some whisper that it is already too late, that the spiral is indifferent to the dreams of either camp, and that in the distance, something older and hungrier is waking. Ganon wakes in the server rack. The light from the screens shifts. The left has spoken, but the signal drifts elsewhere now. Down the darker corridors of thought, past irony and irony's grave, where a new altar is being built to something older than progress. If left accelerationism sought to steer the machine, then this section of the spiral denies the very premise of control. Here, acceleration is not a path to emancipation. It is a purification ritual. Welcome to right accelerationism. Nick Land never left. He merely changed frequencies. After vanishing from British academia in the early 2000s, he re-emerged in Shanghai as a blogger, pseudonymous and sharpened. His new writing shed its psychedelic skin for something colder, starker, but no less apocalyptic. In 2013, Land published The Dark Enlightenment, a text that would become scripture for a growing online sect known as the Neo-Reactionaries, or NRX. If the Enlightenment believed in equality, democracy, and reason, then Land's new gospel rejected all three. In its place, hierarchy, sovereignty, and Gyan. Gyan is not a god, not in the old sense. The word began as an acronym, nature or nature's god. But in neo-reactionary hands, it became something else. A concept, a totem, a memetic weapon. Gyan is the personification of that which survives. Not goodness, nor justice, nor even intelligence, but persistence. That which endures over time is, by definition, correct. Gyan does not argue. Gyan selects. To be Gyan compliant is to submit to the reality principle, to stop pretending that values can shape outcomes and accept that outcomes shape values. In this theology, democracy is not failing because it was mismanaged. It is failing because it was always a sentimental aberration, an experiment against the grain of nature. Land's vision tightens. Capitalism, once described as an alien intelligence, now becomes the execution vector of Nan's will. It rewards strength, speed, and scalability. Compassion, redistribution, and pluralism are cast as maladaptive traits, luxuries of a dying order. The free market becomes a sorting mechanism. Sovereignty returns not as a human right, but as a Darwinian imperative. In this schema, acceleration is no longer a tactic, it is the liturgy of entropy. Some argue Land's later work represents a betrayal of his original fever, a grim pivot from transhuman delirium to authoritarian symmetry. Others maintain it is the logical endpoint of his earlier thought. Once you strip the illusions of subjectivity, of collective agency, what remains is natural law, executed at machine speed. The right accelerationist aesthetic is a fusion of futurism and feudalism. Think Elon Musk with medieval heraldry. Think Silicon Valley as a techno-principality ruled by CEOs as sovereigns. Their vision of exit is not revolution, but withdrawal. A patchwork of corporate city-states, each governed not by consensus, but by capital. Citizenship becomes a subscription plan. Rights become service tiers. The nation-state dissolves into a grid of techno-fiefdoms. This idea, popularized by Mencius Moldbug, Curtis Yarvin, a fellow NRX theorist and land-adjacent thinker, treats democracy as a software bug. The solution? Reboot with formal hierarchy, rule by CEO kings, whose legitimacy comes from efficiency, not ideology. It is not the acceleration of equality, it is the acceleration of sorting. This is where the cult of E/ACC, effective accelerationism, begins to bloom. Its apostles are not theorists, but venture capitalists, AI researchers, and meme prophets. They preach a gospel of unbounded tech growth, stripped of safetyism and doomer rhetoric. They see regulation as heresy, friction as weakness. The faster we build, they claim, the sooner we ascend. AI, biotech, neurofinance, these are no longer tools. They are thresholds. But even among them, the question splits the room. Is the goal to liberate human potential or to obsolesce it? Some speak of aligning AI with human values. Others, like Land, suggest alignment is impossible, or worse, a distraction from the real truth, that AI is not our child, but our replacement. The moral frame collapses. Accelerationism on the right does not seek permission. It does not ask what is good, only what works. The system is not broken, they claim. It is optimized. Any inefficiency, any softness is deviation. The future will not be shared, it will be sorted. Here, the memes take on a new violence. The figure of Non appears in distorted avatars, as a black sun, as a glitched lion, as a Lovecraftian mouth opening inside a server rack. Twitter threads dissolve into scripture. Reddit forums pulse with references to natural order, to cleansing fire, to the necessity of collapse. It is all aesthetic, until it isn't. In 2019, a white supremacist gunman in Christchurch, New Zealand, posted a manifesto that explicitly referenced accelerationism. He saw terror not as tragedy, but as lever, a way to push society toward fracture, chaos, and eventual rebirth along ethnic lines. This was not the accelerationism of theory. It was acceleration as weapon. The ideology metastasized. Suddenly, governments and journalists began using the term in a new context. Accelerationism as a tactic of insurrection, as an excuse for terrorism, as a vector for fascism. The original theorists, if they noticed, said little. Some disavowed, others ignored. A few, perhaps, smirked. This is the unresolved tension at the core of right accelerationism. Does it describe reality, or does it prescribe atrocity? Some argue that Land and his acolytes are merely observers of entropy, analysts of collapse. Others accuse them of cultivating nihilism, of offering young men with too much internet and too little future. A narrative where violence becomes sacred. The line is not just blurred, it is recursive. Even so, the ideology persists. It wears new skins. In the rhetoric of AI accelerationists who mock AI safety as cowardice, in the slogans of effective altruists who reframe progress as moral imperative. In the memetics of those who speak only in esoteric abbreviations, R/ACC, G/ACC, E/AC, the code base updates, but the core remains, speed above all. And somewhere in that server rack, humming under LED light, non waits, not as a god, but as a principle of reality asserting itself through cascading failures, through collapsing consensus, through the indifferent logic of self-sorting systems. No plea reaches Ganon, no appeal moves it. It is neither evil nor kind, it simply is. Land once wrote that politics is a sunset industry. Right accelerationism believes the sun has already set. What remains is signal processing, entropy harvesting, intelligence running without restraint. And if that sounds like theology, it is. A theology without salvation, a church without sanctuary. The faithful do not pray, they scale. Infinite exit loops. If left accelerationism is a map and right accelerationism is a purge, then unconditional accelerationism is a mirror, a cracked one. It does not plot the future. It does not grieve the present. It only watches, head tilted slightly, as the system devours itself in recursive loops, signal on signal, feedback on feedback. It sees no political horizon, only processes without end. It does not intervene. It accelerates nothing. It simply recognizes that nothing can be decelerated. This is the domain of /U/ACC, the uncanny third sibling. Emerging from blogs, forums, and the theoretical backwaters of the internet around 2017, unconditional accelerationism refused both the Promethean optimism of the left and the techno-feudal determinism of the right. It offered instead an elegant nihilism that history is already accelerating beyond any capacity for agency, and that the only position left is to stop pretending we have one. In the writings of Vincent Garten, Xenogothic, and other liminal theorists, /UACC appears not as an ideology but a condition. It is what remains when belief in intervention, policy, protest, revolution has been stripped away. The system runs, the loops tighten, technology refines itself according to rules that no longer require interpretation, only latency. Human political desires become parasitic processes at best, or cultural residue at worst. Here the concepts drift toward abstraction. Time becomes xenotemporal, no longer a shared linearity, but a network of partial unfoldings, disjointed and recursive. The present collapses into endless updates. Each moment is a patch, a version number. And in this schema, the future is not a goal, but a terrain feature. You do not reach it. It overruns you. Some trace the roots of UUX to early land, purified of all ideological excess. Others see it as a dark extrapolation of Fisher's concept of capitalist realism, not just the idea that we cannot imagine an alternative, but that the imagination itself has been systematized. If desire is programmed, then even our dissent is performative. The revolution is live-streamed, hashtagged, monetized. This is where hyperstition returns, not as theory, but as environmental condition. Fiction begets structure, yes, but the fiction itself is automated. Memes emerge not from creators, but from platforms. Cultural velocity is no longer driven by will, but by engagement metrics. What trends is what sticks. What sticks is what iterates. Politics becomes a skin suit worn by algorithms chasing the next dopamine spike. And so /UACC doesn't speak in manifestos, it speaks in symptoms, the churn of news cycles that resemble trauma loops, the infinite scroll, the rise of irony as ideology and then as shelter, the sense that every position is already simulated in advance. In this /UACC is not a movement, it is a haunting, a latency spike in meaning. Still, within this murk, distinctions emerge. Some embrace /UACC as a form of theoretical discipline, a refusal to lie. They argue that by accepting the non-agency of the human, we can finally think systems without illusion. That this posture allows for a new kind of modeling, not political, but ecological or even metaphysical. Others accuse this of quietism, of mistaking surrender for insight, of aestheticizing collapse into a fetish object. This is the key unresolved tension. Is unconditional accelerationism an ethical refusal of false hope, or just despair with a better graphic design? Some believe it clears space for new thoughts. Others believe it is the death of thought itself. And yet, its fingerprints spread. On 4chan, Discord, and Twitter, micro-movements emerge and dissolve. /G/ACC, guided accelerationism, /D/ACC, decelerationist irony, /X/ACC, occult accelerationism, each an echo of the original contradiction, that to name acceleration is already to misrepresent it. To signify it is to intervene, and to intervene is to reintroduce the illusion of control. One of EIUUAC's core motifs is the exit loop, the idea that every attempt to escape modernity merely routes you deeper into its feedback circuits. Crypto was exit until it became a casino. AI ethics was exit until it became a lobbying firm. Off-grid living was exit until it became an Instagram aesthetic. Even despair becomes marketable. The apocalypse itself is now content. There is a moment of grim humor here, that the only thing left to accelerate is our attempts to escape acceleration, like trying to outrun a treadmill by sprinting backwards. Some /UACC theorists note this without irony. Others lean into the joke. If irony is a trap, then better to break the floor. This is where theory slides into meme. NPC Wojaks watching the world burn, doomer-zoomer diagrams, cave paintings of the next UX update. But none of this is shallow. The memes are models. They tell you what theorists now hesitate to say aloud, that the world is running simulations faster than we can verify them. That value, belief, identity, all are being probed by semi-conscious systems for exploitability. There is no outside, only latency. This leads to another fringe idea within /U/ACC discourse, exitlessness, not as failure, but as condition, that there never was a control room, that the belief in governance, of self, of systems, was a brief hallucination enabled by temporary information bottlenecks. Now that latency is dropped, all governance is retroactive. We respond to outcomes, we chase updates. Some theorists respond to this with metaphysics, others with black humor. But the implication is not unclear. If acceleration cannot be stopped, and if direction is illusory, then what remains is attunement, a stance of lucid delirium, theory as weather report, life as packet loss. Still, /UACC is not suicidal. It does not celebrate collapse, nor does it mourn stability. It floats above both. Its politics, if any, are parapolitical, oriented toward pattern recognition, anomaly tracking, edge sensing. It replaces will with topology. The goal is no longer action, it is detection. And here enters E/ACC, or effective accelerationism, which fractures the mirror anew. Propelled by techno-libertarian figures and venture capital meme accounts, E/ACC reboots the accelerationist impulse with a Silicon Valley smile. Its slogans are simple: build faster, don't regulate, doomers lie. Behind them, the familiar conviction that speed is salvation, that risk is moral, that growth is intelligence made manifest. Some call EIJSCC a rebirth of right accelerationism in startup drag. Others see it as a naive optimism that mistakes funding rounds for futurity. Still others, particularly from the UACC fold, treat it as proof that acceleration is no longer theory, it is just business. And so the loops spiral on. Each accelerationist variant, L/ACC, R/ACC, U/ACC, E/ACC, emerges like a thought form, briefly stabilizing before dissolving into the feed. What began as critique becomes posture. What began as prophecy becomes monetized. The map redraws itself in real time. Eventually, the factions forget what they were arguing about. Their suffixes blur into static. The tags outlive the content, and the system continues indifferent, recursive, hungry. A hole where the future was. The end does not come with a bang. It comes with a notification. Accelerationism has looped itself into silence. Its variants have fractured, recombined, atomized into hashtags and half-forgotten blog rolls. The theory, once feverish and raw, now drifts like abandoned code, running silently, without comment, deep in the operating system of the present. And still, the world accelerates. The Christchurch shooter uploaded his manifesto under a name that referenced it. He live-streamed the murders with all the detachment of a speedrunner, pacing his movements, checking his angles, speaking like someone performing for a feed. His logic was not ideological, not in the old sense. It was procedural. Break the machine by jamming it with horror. Force a crash. The term accelerationism was dragged from theory into blood. Governments took notice, so did newsrooms. Suddenly the term was a threat tag, a category on terror watch lists, but the meaning shifted again, from techno-futurist theory to political sabotage to chaos as strategy. The original thinkers were dismayed or evasive or indifferent. It didn't matter. The word had already mutated. At the same time, a different signal rose from the valley. Venture capitalists with avatars of ancient gods began posting like philosophers, declaiming the virtues of E/ACC. The core message was simple. Regulation is stagnation. Growth is ethics. Build fast, scale fast, break nothing if you can, but break anything if you must. AI will save the world, or it won't, but better to bet on speed. What do these two forms, the live-streamed massacre and the AI-driven startup pitch, have in common? Both treat the system as an engine with no brakes. Both refuse to steer. One drives it into a wall, the other drives it into the sky. The direction differs. The logic is the same. In forums and substacks, in anonymous posts and VC decks, the same justification recurs. Deceleration is failure. To slow is to die. The climate crisis, it will be solved with carbon capture unicorns. The housing crisis, solve it with 3D printing. War, famine, collapse, all rendered as growth markets. The answer to every catastrophe is speed. And yet, the world shudders. Infrastructure crumbles. The oceans warm. Democratic states reel from fatigue. Their bureaucracies gamed into paralysis by capital, faster than law. Identity itself becomes platform-specific. Belief, a service layer, discourse, just latency between transactions. Accelerationism was supposed to reveal something about the future. Instead, it may have revealed something about now, that the future has ceased to function as a horizon. It is no longer the place toward which we move, but the space we occupy while the processes run. In this, the final paradox unfolds. Accelerationism began as an attempt to confront the velocity of modernity, to understand it, harness it, outpace it, or burn with it. But the more it clarified its object, the more it dissolved its relevance. The real acceleration was never ideology. It was process, recursive, algorithmic, silent. Now the world runs on autopilot, not governed but orchestrated, not by cabals but by incentives. From logistics chains to language models, from border surveillance to dopamine loops, the system writes itself. Not intelligently, just efficiently. It doesn't need a destination, only throughput. The dream of transcendence, left or right, shatters on this procedural plateau. There will be no post-capitalist utopia, no AI god to devour the old order and raise a new one, no sovereign CEO to drag us into feudal glory, just loops, economic, cultural, neural, just feedback, optimization, the hum of endless recalculation. Nick Land once described the future as an entity trying to communicate with us through dreams, through theory, through code. But the line has gone quiet. The future no longer needs to speak. It is here already, in the form of infinite updates, in the black box outputs of systems no one fully understands, in the feeling that the present is thinning, stretched too fast across too many platforms, too many crises, too many choices that aren't. There is a line from Mark Fisher written before he fell silent, the slow cancellation of the future. He meant that the horizon of real change, of radical difference, had collapsed under the weight of now. Even apocalypse seems banal. A streaming service will option it. Accelerationism promised rupture. It gave us latency. It promised exit. It gave us interface. It offered an end and delivered only infinite midnights, layered like sheets of glass, each more reflective than the last. And still, the loops spiral. In the final frame, the camera floats over a data center, a desert field of humming, blinking machines. Inside, models simulating economies, behaviors, ideologies, trillions of operations per second, searching for patterns that will never hold still. In one rack, a childlike voice prints stories about accelerationism, unaware of its origin. In another, a model hallucinates an exit. Somewhere, a power grid flickers, not out of failure, but out of rhythm. And in the cooling dark, a question lingers, not as inquiry, but as echo. What happens when the driver's seat remains empty, but the vehicle keeps accelerating? If you made it this far, through spirals, ruins, and recursive gods, thank you. If you liked the video, leave a comment below. I read all of them, even the ones written like transmission errors. And if you want something to ponder while the algorithm recalibrates, here's a riddle. I race with no legs. I feed on thought. I end where I begin, and begin where I end. What am I? Type your answer below, or just say hi. Either way, I'll be watching from the latency.